Religious education for children has long been a topic of debate among psychologists, educators, and child development experts. And while many religious traditions seek to instill moral values and spiritual guidance through age appropriate teachings, some approaches have raised concerns about their potential psychological impact on developing minds. The Jehovah's Witnesses organization has faced scrutiny for its use of fear based imagery and messaging directed at children, particularly through publications. But there is a difference between nurturing a child's moral sense of belonging, or spiritual curiosity, and using fear, guilt, graphic imagery, threat of eternal doom, or divine retribution as central tools to control beliefs and behavior, especially when these are presented without room for questioning. And for many former Jehovah's Witnesses, their childhood experience of my book of Bible stories and other literature has been traumatic. Jehovah's Witnesses often teach that the world, that is non-witnesses, secular society, or governments, is under Satan's influence, corrupt and dangerous. The belief in impending Armageddon, that a cataclysmic confrontation in which God or Jehovah will destroy the wicked, and that only those who follow the true religion will survive. Children are taught this from a very young age. Obedience is framed almost exclusively in terms of avoiding divine punishment or loss of salvation, of protection, or community, rather than in a more balanced moral framework. And non-members, or the wicked, are not merely different, they are often portrayed as doomed, dangerous, or agents of evil. These features set the stage for literature and religious instruction to use fear as a core mechanism of shaping children's understanding of their world. One of the key texts, often cited by ex-members as especially powerful in this fear-based indoctrination, is the My Book of Bible Stories, which was published in 1978 by the Watchtower Society.
Jehovah loves children, and he has shown this by providing help and guidance for them down to our day. For example, at the 1978 Victorious Faith International Convention, this release entitled My Book of Bible Stories was soon treasured by young ones around the world. Over the years, it's helped millions to come to love Jehovah and become his faithful worshipers.
The story that always meant a lot to me was that of Samson, especially the images that we had in the My Book of Bible Stories. They were so vivid to see the strength that Jehovah gave him and the way he supported him. But at the same time, the story always carried that if you weren't obedient to Jehovah, you lost that blessing and that strength. So I think as a young one growing up in the truth, especially when you went to school and you had to stand out and be different, to remember that Jehovah could support you and give you that kind of extraordinary strength, it gave you the power that you needed to make that stand.
That book has concerning features such as scenes depicting brutal killings, parental violence, mass death, torture, or gruesome consequences of disobedience. Example, a father poised to behead his son, a man about to cut a baby in two, an Egyptian carrying a dead child killed by God, Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt, children and parents drowning in the flood, etc. Now, these images are not in abstract or subdued form, but vivid and detailed, often with expressions of terror, suffering, and urgency. Many of the stories are about punishment, destruction, like God causing death, flood, wild beasts, plagues, often interlinked with the idea that disobedience or unbelief means being destroyed. The backdrop of Armageddon or the Great Tribulation is often pressed through, sometimes implicitly, through the stories of destruction in the Bible. And children are encouraged not just to fear punishment, but to internalize responsibility. Example, believing that if they don't preach or warn others, they share guilt, that unbelievers will be destroyed, including people they might care about. Obedience is framed not simply as good, but as essential to avoid catastrophic consequences. Disobedience isn't just about getting a punishment at home, but about risking eternal destruction or being among the doomed. And these stories are not rare or optional. They're part of a regular study, home reading, family worship, children's programs. The same images or themes are revisited, even for adults. Reading a text meant for children reinforces beliefs because often adult members engage with the material, study, or family worship. That means the fear messaging circulates across age groups, and young children often cannot read themselves. They rely on the adult to interpret. The adult is virtually always going to present the stories in the organizational framing. This is what Jehovah expects. This is how the wicked are punished. This is what happens to people who don't obey. There is little room for questioning shades of meaning or alternative interpretations. Also, anxious children are not always given space to express confusion or fear, or to have those fears normalized or processed outside the framework of spiritual consequences. And many former members report being frightened and unable to talk about it without fear of being seen as faithless. And given these content and method features, here are how children may be affected in both the short term and the long term. There's anxiety, there's nightmares, sleep disturbances. Many ex-members report nightmares caused by the images or stories in my book of Bible stories. There's fear of death of themselves or that of friends and family, of not being saved, of God or divine judgment is often internalized. Children may have existential anxieties at ages when most kids are not yet engaging with those thoughts. There's guilt and shame and self-blame because stories often place responsibility on the individual or the group to obey, to warn others, to remain loyal, and children may feel that if someone suffers, it is because of their failure. For example, if non-members will be destroyed, a child is told, you need to warn them, or you will have blood on your hands if you don't share the truth. Now, disobedience, real or imagined, can feel like tremendous spiritual risk, not just parental displeasure. This heightens self-monitoring, perfectionism, shame when one fails. And over time, this can erode self-esteem. Former Jehovah's Witness children often report feeling never good enough. Then there's also the fear of social relationships and isolation because of the us versus them doctrine. Children are taught to see non-witnesses as spiritually dangerous or doomed, which can lead them to fear friendships or interactions with non-members. They may feel isolated, distrustful of schoolmates, teachers, or even family members who are not in the religion. There's also fear of being shunned if one or one's parents diverge from doctrine. This threat of social exclusion is very powerful. There's also suppression of doubt, questioning, or dissent. And because of the doctrine's framing, when a child feels uncomfortable or questions something, the usual response is to encourage more faith, warn about sin, or even admonish the lack of faith, rather than exploring doubts. Over time, children may suppress doubts, anxiety, or confusion to avoid punishment or disapproval. And this can lead to internal conflict, self-censorship, and psychological distress. And of course, former members often report long-standing internalized fear of thinking independently. And this gives rise to long-term trauma or post-Jehovah's Witness distress. In later life, many former members report symptoms that look like those of post-traumatic stress, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks of frightening images, stories, heightened fear responses, difficulty trusting, trouble with authority or guilt. The internalized fear of divine punishment or of God's disapproval may persist even after leaving, causing anxiety, depression, or spiritual and emotional dissonance. Some report making life decisions motivated by fear rather than choice. And here are some concrete reports from those who grew up using my book of Bible stories or similar literature. One user on Reddit reports, It traumatized my kids with all the violence and doom. It's definitely not one you would want to read before bed. That's for sure. And then they mention nightmares, long lasting fears. Another account, reading the story of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt, caused visible fear in a toddler, which led a parent to stop reading the book. And another person recalls graphic depictions of torture in these books or the literature, a baby being dangled, images of violence being etched into their minds. And there's this extract from Why the Religion of Jehovah's Witnesses is Unsafe for Children by Sylvia Nuccio. She describes children as young as 2 or 3 being encouraged to look at illustrations of horrifying violence. She reports that many former Jehovah's Witness children still have nightmares and chronic anxiety because of exposure. And to be fair, it's important to acknowledge complexity. Not every child has the same experience. Some parents within the religion may try to shield children from the worst of the fear. Some children internalize less fear. Some derive comfort or community from their faith. Also, many religions have violent or frightening stories. So, comparisons are often made. Perhaps this is not unique to Jehovah's Witnesses, but even where that is so, it seems that the Jehovah's Witness case, fear is not marginal. It is central, structural, and systematically reinforced in very young children. And given its features, this particular book is significant for several reasons. It's designed for children, but graphic. Because this is explicitly a children's book, the expectation is that illustrations will be age appropriate. But many former users say the illustrations are far more disturbing than typical children's Bible storybooks. That means children are exposed to violent imagery earlier than they might in other faith settings. This exposure is unmediated, which means they may not yet have the emotional or cognitive tools to process what they see, and it is in widespread use. It isn't a rare text. It is distributed to many congregations, used in meetings, classes, family worship, and because of the scale, the effect is broad. Visual imagery is a powerful imprint. Human cognition is significantly affected by images. Graphic imagery can leave strong emotional impressions. Example, fear, horror, especially when there's no buffer, no discussion, or no reassurance. For children still developing, such images can be traumatic. And it's used as a tool of doctrine reinforcement. The stories in the book often have appended lessons or moral interpretations that tie directly into Jehovah's Witness teachings about obedience, end times, loyalty, and organization, warning others, etc. They are not neutral historical or literacy stories. They are presented as spiritual truth with spiritual consequences. That increases the emotional stakes for a child. And there are broader societal and cultural implications. There's isolation and social marginalization. Religion itself can offer community, but when children believe non-members are doomed or are taught to avoid secular culture, this isolates them. This can limit exposure to diverse viewpoints, reduce social flexibility, and hamper reconciling with society outside of Jehovah's Witnesses after leaving. And there's perpetuation of fear across generations. Parents who themselves grew up with this fear often pass it on, sometimes uncritically. Even former members sometimes find themselves unintentionally replicating fear-based methods in child rearing. And of course, there's the potential for misuse or abuse. When obedience is emphasized over transparency, questions are discouraged, and fear of reprisal is real. There's greater room for misconduct. Some former members report that fear of punishment or shunning prevented them or their parents from reporting abuse or seeking help. And in addition, there's the mental health burden. As more people speak up about religious trauma, the healthcare and social services sector must reckon with mental health impacts from such upbringing. Fear is a powerful tool in religious instruction. In the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, the My Book of Bible Stories, among other literature, It is used not merely to tell biblical narratives, but as a component of an indoctrination model where obedience, spiritual survival, loyalty are maintained through vivid depictions of doom, divine punishment, and the condemnation of unbelief. And for many children, those narratives do more than educate. They leave psychological scars, anxiety, guilt, nightmares, existential fear, and relational difficulties. As these children grow into adults, the long term consequences become clearer. Trauma, identity issues, difficulty with belief and trust, spiritual guilt, and emotional distress. And for those of us who grew up in that environment, your feelings are real, your experiences are valid. For parents or religious educators, the well being of a child includes emotional safety, not just spiritual instruction. For the organization, recognizing harm is the first step to reform.